Believe it or not, they're still arguing about what Tibet should be like. The Chinese want to bring it up to date and make it just like the rest of China. But the Tibetans are desperate to hold on to the spiritual world they love.
The overriding concern of the Chinese Communist Party is for China to become modern.
China is throwing huge amounts of cash at Tibet. They say they're using it to build hospitals, schools and roads. Just look at the rise in standards of living their publicity shouts.
The Chinese believe that they are bringing modernity to Tibet, that they're rescuing the Tibetans from superstition, from backwardness, from poverty.
But not everyone believes them. People die 10 years younger in Tibet than in richer parts of China, and yet every year millions of Chinese flock there because they think they can make a fast buck. And the Tibetans are worried because they think their home is becoming more Chinese every day.
The kind of modernization that is taking place in Tibet now have given rise to rampant prostitution, destruction of ancient Tibetan architecture, and replaced by faceless modern Chinese houses. These are not the kind of development that a Tibetan wants, and I certainly don't want this kind of modernization.
But this isn't just about what's going on inside Tibet anymore. Two of the world's best propaganda factories are fighting to make us believe them. But the Tibetans don't have it all their own way because China's gone online.
You have the Chinese government making out that all Tibetans are very happy, that it's a kind of paradise on earth, that they've all forgotten about the Dalai Lama.
Knowing who to believe is a hard call.
Tibet's exiled spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, says the country's unique culture is increasingly under threat from Chinese rule.
In Tibet, there are thousands of police and army officials who keep a tight watch on every aspect of daily life.
When I stayed there, our phones would ring in our hotel rooms in the middle of the night just to check that we were where we said we were going to be. And when you go to visit monasteries, we were told, don't just talk to monks because they're not all monks.
There are quite a lot of police spies, for example, inside every monastery with the job of reporting on anybody who's behaving in a subversive way.
It's not just tourists and Tibetan monks who feel the fear of Chinese control.
Even as a young child, I used to go to the township headquarters. There would be, some child who was the son or daughter of the local officials, and you were scared of them.
The monitoring of everyday life in Tibet means that no one can really talk about what's going on.
People know what the limits are of expression. People know they can't criticise the government. Censorship in China has been compared to a giant snake sitting in a chandelier. Everybody knows it's there, and everyone knows if they say the wrong thing it will drop on them, but everyone pretends not to notice it.
And the fear of that snake has led to paranoia. The Chinese communist spies are everywhere. And in 1989, all the paranoia and fear was finally justified. But to understand what happened, we'll have to go back to 1976. When Mao died, the nation mourned, and how. But they also realized that things would have to change. By 1980, the new Chinese leadership began reforms in Tibet. They rebuilt monasteries and for the first time in nearly a decade, allowed the Tibetans to openly practice Buddhism. The new freedoms meant that they could leave the country, and paying homage to the exiled Dalai Lama in Dharamsala was top of their list. In addition to allowing pilgrimage, the Chinese also let the Tibetans back out on the streets to protest.
There were many, many monks and nuns who would go on the streets of Lhasa, the Baku, and they would shout "Free Tibet, long live the Dalai Lama."
And there were then repeated demonstrations during 1987, 88, 89.
Culminating in the biggest demonstration in March 1989. But like the infamous Tiananmen Square demo in Beijing, the Chinese didn't let it end that way.
I can feel my t-shirt covered in blood everywhere. They arrested me. They accused me of counter-revolutionary activity.
Jimmy was sentenced to 12 years for shouting "Free Dalai Lama," and along with several hundred other monks and nuns, ended up in the notorious Drapchi prison.
They know for just shouting "Free Tibet," they will be arrested, tortured, at risk of death in prison. Often the torture is so bad.
Of course, none of this ever appeared on the telly in China. For many Tibetans, a crackdown in '89 was the last straw, and hundreds of families made plans to escape.
We were taken to this detention center where they have all the beggars. They're all given work, basically, just to clear them away from the streets. They make them plow fields, construct roads, break rocks. In this labor camp, they basically just kick you around like a ball, yeah.
The threat to Tibetan culture and religion shows no signs of going away. "15 years after the Chinese crackdown in Tibet, the unrelenting pace of Chinese modernization is taking its toll."
Scratch only a little bit below the surface and you still find a strong sense of Tibetan identity, and also a strong sense of loyalty to the Dalai Lama. And it just shows that on that fundamental level the Chinese authorities have not succeeded in winning the hearts and minds of Tibetans.
But that loyalty was tested to the limit. The Dalai Lama, in an attempt to give concession to the Chinese, abandoned his claim to independence for his beloved country in favour of more limited self-rule.
Tibet is not going to get the independence in the near future. So the autonomy is something that China cannot deal with. If we just go on talking about independence, drag into another 100 years, Tibet will be gone.
It depends a lot of how China changes. And if China becomes a kind of democratic country, maybe then Tibetans would have more freedom in their own country. But that doesn't mean that they would get their country back.
Until that settlement, all the Tibetans in exile will wait, often thousands of miles away, for the chance to go home.
My parents' house, it's full of suitcases. They've been since 1959, still hoping to go back.